Here we are again. Welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 77. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons, and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. Today, we are stepping away from the dark realm in a sense, and we're opening the wardrobe door on why spirits wear clothing. Eric from Utah asks, why do we see spirits in clothes, and how does it all work? I have to say that I've never questioned spirits not wearing clothing. But some people have, so I thought, why not slip into something a little more comfortable and unpack why spirits wear clothing? Have you ever wondered about this particular topic? Do you ever see spirits in their favourite threads or wearing their favourite fashion line? And what answers have you come up with? I have to say, I've always assumed that spirits stayed in the clothes that they passed away in. But what if you died in the shower? Or you were taking a bath, or while having surgery? What then? The mind boggles. So what I've come up with for you today, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I take my iPad to bed with me quite often, so I'm lying there in bed trying to get to sleep, and all these possibilities were popping into my mind. So I have 17 possibilities and some observations for you that my brain came up with in the middle of the night. And let me know what you think. You might even have some other ideas about why spirits wear clothing. So let's get into it. Number 1, we are living energy. And when we die, our soul lives on, but projects itself when visiting us as wearing the clothes that you are used to seeing them in, to give you a sense of comfort. My dad, God love him, God bless his soul, he always wore a blue woolen beanie in his later years. And that's how I would see him when he would show up in my car, which was originally his car. Now, did I want to see him that way? Maybe, as I remembered the blue beanie was something that he always wore. Or did he just love his beanies, because he did have quite a few, and he just chose to wear his favourite one when visiting? I never expected him to visit. I simply don't. And especially sitting in his little car and sort of come for a drive with me until it happened one day. And he just randomly showed up. And I'm just driving along and focusing on the road, and he pops into my mind. And then I see him in my peripheral vision. I could see his grey trousers he used to wear, and I could see his blue jacket and his blue beanie. I knew exactly who it was. So he'd just sit there, and he'd give me a smile, and he'd go for a ride for a few minutes, and then he'd be gone again. Now, number 2, I wonder, do we get to choose the type of clothes we wear when we die? Do we get to choose a fashion wardrobe? Can we choose our favourite ensemble, our hairstyles, our jewellery? Whatever it was that you loved when you were alive, do you get to wear that for all of eternity? Or do we change our clothing? I have to say that I generally don't see spirits more than once. If they're coming to me for help, they're coming in their particular outfit, and then once they transition, I never see them again. Now, I have seen my dad a few times, and he's always been wearing the same outfit. But is that his personal choice, or is that the way it is? And I have to say, the 2 prison warden spirits that I've spoken to who are still on the job were indeed wearing the uniforms that they wore when they were alive. And they were on the job, and I can't imagine them wearing anything else. And also too, Adam the convict spirit that I've spoken to here in Tasmania, when he was incarcerated, the place that he was in was actually transitioned into a mental health facility while he was there. And he would actually be working while he was carrying out his sentence. Now, what he wore, what I can describe to you is he just had on like a plain T-shirt, just a very plain sort of muted coloured jacket, and some, again, plain-looking canvas-type pants with a few holes in them. Now, I suppose he knew nothing else, and he's still here in this reality doing what he did when he was alive. I wonder if he even assumes that he could possibly change his clothing. Now, number 3, clothing is a symbol of status for some people when they're alive. So when they die, do they still think that they need that clothing to retain their status in the afterlife? I mean, do we have status in the afterlife? I don't think we do. I think we all just return to our soul energy. But we all have different opinions on how it works, and we don't actually know until we get there. Now, number 4, this is a slightly odd prospect, but I'm just putting it out there. Does clothing hold an energetic memory in the afterlife? Now, I know here in the earth reality that objects and clothing hold energy. I can pick up an object that's not mine, and I can tell the person something about that object that they've given me. Sometimes it's random information. Sometimes it's very relevant and someone needs a reading from a particular necklace or some keys or a piece of jewellery or a bag or a shoe. Doesn't matter what it is. Energy gets imprinted into everything. So when we see spirits in clothing, does that clothing hold a type of energetic memory? Now, number 5, maybe favourite clothing makes a spirit still feel alive and still connected to their families, their friends, their homes, and when they were alive in this reality. I imagine too that when you're in spirit form and you can work with manipulating energy, I suppose you can imagine up any form of clothing you want. I mean, do spirits really care? Do they care about what they wear? Some may do, some may not. Now, clothing is a sense of personality. It carries a person's sense of identity sometimes, and can also sometimes be connected to cultural or religious beliefs, just like when people were alive. So do some spirits feel that they want to transition into wearing more spiritual clothes when they pass? Imagine you're out in the garden and you pass away while you're doing your gardening. Do you want to stay in your gardening clothes forever? Maybe not. So if you belong to a particular cultural belief, do you want to be seen in those clothes? Do you want to feel more comfortable in those clothes? Something to think about. Now, number 6. Some people say that there are 2 types of spirits. You've got the residual spirits and the interactive or intelligent spirits. The residual spirits are an energetic echo of the past, repeating their routines from the past, so would most likely be dressed in the clothing of the time. And the intelligent spirits who can interact with the living, do they need to wear clothing or do they like their favourite clothing? You know, sometimes these items might make them feel good or remind them of the good old days. Or for some people like Adam, who's the convict spirit, the not so good old days. Now, I visited a very active hospital site here in Tasmania. It's no longer used as a hospital. It is simply present in the landscape. And a friend of mine wanted to set up some paranormal tours there. So I got in the car and did the 3.5-hour drive to get there. Fascinating place. Lots and lots of spirits still at work in the hospital. And the staff were indeed dressed in their work clothes. Now, I have to tell you, this is kind of funny. Now, this is an old building that's been shut down for 20, 25 years nearly. And it was very dusty. The floors needed mopping, the walls needed cleaning, all your standard cleaning procedures. And I'm in the X-ray room, and I was aware that there were spirits at the facility. So I got my cleaning supplies and just very quietly went to the X-ray room. And there I am mopping the floor. And I wasn't particularly thinking about anything, really. I was just mopping the floor and just enjoying some some quiet time. When, in my mind, a man turned up. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. We know now that he is an X-ray specialist who used to work at the hospital. And I didn't know at the time until I spoke to my friend who lives in the town, and she has a medical background. And when I described what he was wearing, she went, "Yep, I know who that could possibly be." Now, this X-ray specialist, he wore sort of a 3/4 length white lab coat. And his hair was sort of combed over, and he had his glasses on, and he looked like he had sort of books or a clipboard. He had very business-like pants and sort of businessman's shoes, as you could imagine. Very professional looking. Now, he looked at me like it was, it was rather interesting, like, "What are you doing?" And I saw him in my mind. I didn't see him with my eyes. And I just explained to him. I just talked to him out loud as we were sort of cleaning around the hospital. And he was like, "Okay, all right, I know what you're doing. Just carry on, carry on." And I have to say too that the other staff in the hospital, right from the nursing staff down to the cleaning staff, I haven't seen the kitchen staff, but I could imagine that they would still be in their uniforms as well. They were all wearing the appropriate clothing to work in a hospital. And even the resident patients who are in spirit form at that hospital are still dressed in their hospital gowns. And I know that because when I rang up to go and visit my friend who's in this town who wants to do the tours, on the site of the hospital there is a nurses' home, which is now used as accommodation for the living. And I thought, right, this is the prime place for me to stay, close to the hospital, and also I might have a little bit of interaction with some of the spirits there. So as I'm talking to the man that owns the property and booking my week's stay at this place, a lady in a hospital gown popped into my mind. Now, I wasn't thinking about the hospital. I was solely focusing on talking to the man on the other end of the phone line. And there she is. And in her arm, there's kind of a blanket, but not a blanket. It was really, really interesting. She needed help, and she knew that I was coming to this site. So she had shown herself in her hospital gown, sort of clutching this blanket that wasn't really a blanket. It was a blanket, but it was full of nothing. There was simply nothing in the blanket. And also too, there was a convict lady who showed herself to me when I visited a local historical site in Hobart. Now, I'd never been to this place before. I'd kind of avoided it because I knew there was lots of sadness and lots of grief and lots of trauma, and there would most likely be lots of spirits present. But anyway, a friend of mine was here one day and she said to me, "Look, let's go and visit this site." So I plucked up the courage and off we went. So we paid our fee and in we went with our brochure, and we're just sort of walking around. And I like to go and stand in places. I love to go and stand in places and use my body as a dowsing tool and feel the energy of that place. And quite often I'm connected to the emotions. I'm just feeling this energy, and all of a sudden another lady popped into my mind. I can describe the clothing to you. It was so vivid. I can still see it in my mind now. She had a very big sort of white but dirty bonnet on her head. Her face was dirty and sweaty. Her clothing she looked really dishevelled, like she needed a good bath. Her clothing it wasn't in tatters, but her dress had seen better days. But she too was pleading, "I need help, I need help." And this lady sort of had a blanket in her arm, but it was empty. And she was pleading for help. She's like, I need your help. I know you can see me. Please help me." If you're interested in hearing those two ladies' stories and some other spirit stories, you can have a listen back to episode 55. Now, number 7, spirits appear in clothing because that's how they remember themselves, wearing a certain outfit. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Or an outfit that they wore during a memorable event. Now, this is a prime example. A podcast guest that I had on called Brianna, and she described seeing a lady standing on the edge of the road. This was a spirit lady. And she said it looked a little bit like her neighbour, but she had a whole car full of people, so she wasn't really paying a lot of attention other than seeing this lady on the edge of the road dressed in a sort of long, flouncy, very posh-looking dress. and she had on a big hat with a pink ribbon. Now, when Brianna got up the next day, she found out that her neighbour had passed away that night, and the clothing that she described was this lady's coming out outfit. Now, Brianna had a really close relationship with her neighbour, and was the neighbour showing herself to Brianna to say goodbye? It's kind of a beautiful thought, isn't it? This lady had sort of regressed back into the age that she was comfortable wearing this beautiful dress and her big hat. And she'd come to see Brianna to say, thank you for your friendship. It's been lovely. It's been wonderful, but I'm off now and I'll see you in the future. Number 8, another thought on spirit energy forms. This is kind of about clothing, but not about clothing, but it's interesting anyway. When my dad passed, let me rewind a little bit. The night he died, I stayed with my mum and we slept in the lounge room. And I woke up in the middle of the night to see something or someone standing right in front of me. Now, we were in the dark. There was no lights, there was no street lights. Mum had those curtains that they were blackout curtains. There was no light in the room at all. But my eyes had adjusted slightly. Like I wasn't in a half asleep state imagining this. I was fully awake. And what I saw standing in front of me was this very close, like it was standing right next to the arm of the chair, was this very tall, wavering shape that looked like fast-moving static that you see on a TV screen. Now, my dad had just died 3 hours previously. Was this his energy in transition? I didn't see clothing, but spiritual people say that it takes time for a spirit to adjust to being in a new form. I imagine it would have been quite confusing for him about what had happened because he simply died very suddenly. It was one of those deaths that you just don't see coming. And I kind of think it's nice that he came and he showed himself to me. He said, I'm here, I'm okay. Because my mum wouldn't have seen that wavering sort of shape. And if she did, she wouldn't have understood what it was. Now, number 9. If spirits are still here in the earth reality, then would they most likely be wearing the clothes that they died in? This is probably the answer that most people are going to go to. But what about those people that die in the shower? Or suddenly maybe have a heart attack in the bath? Or if they're on a nudist beach, just getting a bit of sun and all of a sudden, bam, that's it, gone. What happens then? Would they be spiritually clothed in their burial or cremation clothing? Who knows? I don't communicate a lot with spirits, but I have to say, next time I have some spirits come for transition, or more likely it'll be a spirit that'll be present in a home that I'm doing an energetic clearing on, I might just ask if I may ask them some questions about their clothing. Now, number 10, this sort of ties in a little bit to number 9. Do spirits who don't know that they've died go looking for their wardrobes of clothing? Do they go looking for a change of clothing? Which is most likely long gone to a second-hand shop, or it's all been sort of divvied up amongst the family members. I had a client with a spirit lady in his home one day. This is rather interesting. You'll get a giggle out of this. This lady would not leave. She'd simply died suddenly and she missed her things. She loved her clothing. She loved sewing and making beautiful clothes. And she especially loved her Singer sewing machine. And she told me when I tuned into the house, she said, I'm not leaving until all my things are taken care of respectfully. Because what had happened? The family needed the money. They needed to sell her house very quickly. So what they did is they put everything in the back room that belonged to the lady that they couldn't get rid of. And a lot of the time that's personal things that they need to take their time to go through. But they didn't do that. So they simply piled everything willy-nilly into the back room, locked the door. They sold the house to a man who was indeed looking for a house, and it fitted what he needed perfectly. Neat, tidy, well looked after home. He thought, this is great, I'm going to love living here. Within 3 weeks, he told me, he said, I can't live here anymore. He said, I need your help. I desperately need your help. He said, I have someone in this house that follows me to the kitchen, to the bedroom, gets into bed with me, sits on the couch with me, possibly even follows me into the shower. He said, I can't cope. I don't know who it is. I need your help. So I tuned in, as I said earlier, and the lady told me her story. And when I conveyed the story to the man, he went, right, I'm going to get on to the family and they can come and very respectfully divvy up her things. And she was there right until the very last moment. The spirit lady showed herself to me one day. I was sitting at my work desk. I hadn't expected her this soon, but she turned up. She was quite a forceful lady, but kind of kind and generous. And she had a suitcase with her, which is the only time I've ever seen a spirit with a suitcase. Because remember, she loved her clothing. And I'm sure she'd packed everything in there that she wanted. She was ready to go. And I called in Archangel Azrael, who's the archangel that helps spirit energy transition into the afterlife. And away she went, suitcase and all. It was so lovely. It was just one of those memorable experiences that I will never forget. Now sometimes, number 11, often I see spirits, well, kind of parts of spirits. And I don't specifically always see clothing. It's not that they're naked, but I will only usually see their faces or their hands or their eyes or something they want to convey a message about. Maybe they had a heart attack when they died and they'll be putting their hand on their heart, and I might just see sort of that torso area. And that's fine, because they're not wanting to show me their ensemble that they're wearing in the afterlife. They're simply conveying a message. I had a heart attack. I don't want to be here anymore. I finally realised that I've died. Can you please help me transition into the afterlife? Number 12. This is another interesting point. Similar to Brianna's experience with the neighbour. When my nan passed, she was around about 75. And she walked a specific way, and she talked a specific way. And when I had a spirit turn up in my house one day, speaking and walking the same way that Nan did, but looked much younger, I had to sort of squint my eyes, and I'm like, Nan, is that you? And she looked at me kind of shocked as to well, can't you tell it's me? But she was, I don't know, she looked like she was about 20 or 25 and wearing clothes that kind of matched the time. So why I'm mentioning this is when we pass from our physical bodies and we're still in the earth reality and we choose to stay in the earth reality, because not every spirit wants to instantly transition into the afterlife. Sometimes spirits have unfinished business. Now, I don't know about that with my nan. I didn't get that far. Maybe she was just keeping an eye on all of us because she had a lot of medical illness towards the end of her life and she was quite housebound. So she didn't get to go out, didn't get to see the family as much as she wanted to. So maybe she was checking up on us all now. But I knew it was her. I just knew it. Can we choose to revert back to the existence that we enjoyed at a younger time in our life, where we were, happier or healthier? And dress in what makes us happy, what makes us feel good. Now, number 13 is kind of prudish. Do our minds clothe spirits out of modesty? Very possibly. Are spirits modest and wear clothing to cover their bodies when they're in the ether? Or do they do it just when they visit us? I imagine when spirits are on the other side, they're just pure energy. Their energy, they're just wafting around doing whatever spirit energy does in the afterlife. But when they come to see us, do they put clothing on? Because that is what society expects us to do. The general rules of society are that you wear clothing in public. It just is what it is. Now, number 14. This one kind of gets me. This got my brain really thinking. Does ghostly clothing have colour? Or is it white or pale grey? Or does it have that kind of luminous transparency about it, sort of glowing or shimmering? I'd have to say that when I've seen spirits in their clothing, it's always coloured and usually quite vividly. I don't see spirits in black and white or like a faded sort of shimmering light. I just see them in full colour like they're people. They've kind of got a slight transparency to them. You know that they're spirit energy because of the way that your body picks up on their energy. But their clothing is vivid. I have an example of this. When I was driving to see a friend at the north of Tasmania, I was in the car for about 3 hours. It seems to be everywhere you go in Tasmania. I'm always talking about driving for 3 hours. But anyway, it was a 3-hour journey. And on the way there, I'm getting close to the town where she lives, and into my head pops an elderly lady wearing a pink fluffy dressing gown. Now, it was pink. It was hot pink. She was shuffling along and she had that feel of someone who was elderly. Now, this was really unusual, and I know that my friend's mum had passed away, and I did wonder if she was showing herself to me. When I got to my friend's house, I said on the drive, a lady in a pink dressing gown showed up. She didn't talk to me. She didn't speak to me. I saw the back of her head and the back of her dressing gown. And when I described the dressing gown to my friend, she went, "No, that's not Mum. Mum would not have worn that. No, Mum would never wear hot pink, especially not a fluffy dressing gown." On the hill above my friend's house is an aged care facility. And when she said that, I went, "Oh, that's where this lady came from." And she was showing herself. Like, she wasn't pleading for help like the other ladies I mentioned earlier. She didn't want help. She simply, she just popped into my mind as I'm driving along. Now, number 15, dark entities such as the dust man. Now, you wouldn't have heard about the dust man. This was an experience that a friend of mine's 6-year-old son had. Now, we're going to call this boy Todd. Now, Todd wandered into the kitchen one day and told his mum that he was seeing a dark man wearing a black hoodie, black shoes, black pants, black gloves. And he was wandering around the house and he was following Todd everywhere. It was driving him a little bit bonkers. And he came up to Mum in a very matter-of-fact way and just kind of pointed and went, "There's someone following me. The dust man is following me." Now, you're asking, why is he called the dust man? Because Todd told his mum, who then told me, that this energy would simply poof into dust when he disappeared. It's like he would just turn into these particles. And then he would show up again outside the house where Todd was, or in Todd's bedroom, or in the lounge room. It's almost like he was energetically connected to Todd. There is a reason for that, which I talked about in the Dustman episode, which I can't remember the number of, but if you look through the episodes, the Dustman was a dark entity that had been sent to this boy for a particular reason. Now, 99% of dark and demonic entities that I've seen do not wear clothing. They're purely energy. Even the ones that show up in my house when I'm about to start a house clearing job, they always get a little bit annoyed or a little bit upset that they have to move out. It's like they're being evicted, but in a very nice way. They'll show up in my house and I will feel their presence, or I will see sort of black shadows that are moving or black shapes that are sort of sliding across the floor. And I know exactly what it is. They're just making their presence known, but they never wear clothing. Why was this particular entity called the Dust Man wearing clothing? It was very, very odd. Now, you're probably thinking, did Todd make this up? Absolutely not. Todd is very, very spiritual, even for someone who is 6 years old. He is way beyond his years in seeing energy, feeling energy, and I'm so glad that I can be of assistance to him and his family and help him to understand that this is a totally normal way to be. He just senses what's in the energetic environment. Now, at number 16, we're getting to the more unusual end of the scale now. You have entities like the Hat Man and also these cloaked beings that people report seeing. Are these entities aliens? Are they interdimensional visitors? Do interdimensional beings and aliens wear clothing? I mean, people draw entities in clothing and not in clothing. And extraterrestrial beings are simply energy as well. They are pure form of energy, just like us, when we leave these physical bodies. So that's something interesting to think about. Dan the Paraman, who is a friend of mine that I interviewed back in episode 18, he shared a story from his childhood about seeing a green-eyed cloaked figure that stood in the barn one night. He'd got home late and he'd forgotten to feed the dog before he went out. So he went into the barn to get the dog his food. And as he's getting the dog's food, he turned around to be, I was going to say the word confronted. He wasn't really confronted. This being was just simply standing in the doorway. It was this very tall, I think Dan said it was about 7-8 feet tall, green glowing eyes and just cloaked. He could see the movement of a cloak. Do extraterrestrial entities wear clothing? Or do they present themselves in clothing to make themselves more acceptable to us? Because that's something I do wonder. Did the dust man, did he wear clothing to get closer to a 6-year-old boy? Did he think that this 6-year-old boy would be more susceptible, more interested, more curious? Who knows? Who knows? This is rather mind-boggling stuff. This is the life I lead. This is my daily reality. It's always fascinating, and I love sharing everything that I learn with you. Now, we've come to the strangest of all strange experiences. This is number 17. I had this rather unusual vision to share with you about a kind of spirit. It's sort of a spirit, but not a spirit. You'll understand when I tell you who it is. Sort of developing my psychic skills and just exploring in meditation who you can talk to and where you can go and what you can do. Now, I used to think about Jesus a lot. Not in a religious way, but more in a spiritual way when I started on my spiritual path. Now, most people, when they see Jesus, they're expecting to have that preconceived idea that he's going to have long, brown, flowing hair, probably brown eyes, wearing a white or a glowing or a golden shimmering robe, have a beard and have very kind-looking eyes. I have a different observation for you. I'm sitting there in a meditation one day, wanting to connect to my spirit guides, and I heard the name Jesus. And what I saw was rather interesting and might shock some people. There was no white shimmering clothing, but instead, oh dear, wait for it. What I saw was blue straight leg jeans, no shoes. He had very tanned feet and he was sitting in a green beanbag. Now, this is no joke. I am not making this up. This is absolutely how I saw. The energy was so peaceful. I just knew it was the Christ energy. Now, I've never, ever forgotten the first time that I saw this. And I reckon he appeared in that way because he knew that I would relate to it. I would feel comfortable seeing someone in jeans lounging in a beanbag. And I've seen him that way many times now, because quite often I'll call on the Christ energy when I'm doing my energy work. And I still see the green beanbag, the denim-covered legs and the bare feet. I just think it's funny. It just gives me a little chuckle. It puts a smile on my face, which is the most important thing. Now, whether or not you believe that spirits wear clothing, I think spirits do. And our perceptions of them all come down to our personal and our cultural beliefs. I mean, who would have thought that I would come up with 17 different possibilities and observations today? This topic has truly never crossed my mind before, and I do thank Eric for bringing it up. Oh, and don't forget, if you like the content of this podcast and you don't want to miss any future episodes, please subscribe. And you can share with your friends so we can get the message out there. We can spread the message about these paranormal pranksters and what they get up to in our homes. I would really appreciate it. So in episode 78, I am excited to be speaking with Joshua Chairs, Now, Joshua is the founder and director of Phantom Detectives LLC, and this paranormal investigation team are based in Pennsylvania in the US. He is a passionate paranormal investigator. He is a writer, a researcher, musician, and also a publicist. Joshua will be sharing his wealth of knowledge from understanding paranormal hauntings, explaining paranormal investigation equipment, how the team's respectful approach connects them with spirits in every location, and he shares some of his most memorable experiences from the team's 23 investigations. So make sure you join us next week for this fascinating and informative episode on paranormal investigation. So thank you for joining me today, and don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.